This podcast is about you. Are you ready? Take a moment and ask yourself, do I know the truth, and do I even care? Well, if you care at all, we have something for you. Stick around. We're a podcast that does not ignore the truth about life, people, or God. Larry Kutzler has been a pastor, a Bible commentator, a radio and podcast producer, and now is your host. This is a podcast you won't forget.
The things that I hear, though, the people that drive by, the key one is always, why don't you get a job? They don't understand it's not so simple. You have no ID, you have no address, you have no birth certificate, you don't even have a phone that you can reliably give the number to because that number may change. It's a burner phone. You're really in a dire position to try to get a job. And the other thing I think people don't realize, if you've been addicted to any kind of substance, your emotional maturity stops right at that point where you started. So you've got that going against you. You probably haven't had any good mentors. And the one thing that comes up over and over again is they're not acclimated to working 5 days a week, 8 hours a day yet. They can't just jump from 0 to 60 in a second. They have to have a ramp up. There's got to be an acclimation. And if we're going to do this well, we can't just point the way. We got to lead the way.
Shawn Morrison, in the years I have known you, you have perfected the idea of kindness through an organization called Good in the Hood. You use the idea of intentional kindness to reach out to people in need. And more recently, you have included a project of kindness toward those experiencing homelessness called Do You See Me? I am curious today, really curious today, to find out what this project is all about. And I know it has to do with dignity. And I know, Shawn, that you and I, as both people that believe in Jesus, that in the Word of God, in the New Testament, there was a time when Jesus was dealing with lepers. And I couldn't help but equate that lepers back in his day are somewhat representative of those experiencing homelessness today, because they're ignored, right? Tell us what your thoughts are.
Yeah, great point, Larry. A couple years ago, like everyone else, I was noticing the increase in those that held, signs, requesting help. We sometimes call them panhandlers. They're on usually at exit ramps off the freeway or places where a lot of cars park. And like everyone else, I was wondering what I should do about this. Should I give them cash? Like you and probably everyone else I'm saying to myself, well, they're probably going to use it for drugs or alcohol. And I mean, I was silently judging them, not really taking the time to get to know what's really going on. And this whole project, we call it Can You See Me? Is just to try to give some visibility again to those who we intentionally do not see. And very often we don't see and we don't hear their voice. We don't give them an opportunity. We just want to restore those neighbors in need who have been stepped on or even stepped over, ignored, overlooked. It's the very people that in the New Testament, they called them beggars. It was the people that were beggars, that were disabled. And very often we don't know what the story is. So we just assume this person is scamming and or we dehumanize them. So our whole purpose was to bring humanity back to those who maybe, are reduced to begging for bread. We're not looking, Larry, to exonerate them, and we're not looking to vilify them. My hope is by just speaking with them like a human being, we can just learn their story. We can learn not only about their story, they have an opportunity to speak to the community about their feelings and their thoughts on life and how maybe the community could come around and make a difference. Again, this isn't to say that those standing on the street corner are doing the right thing. Perhaps it's the only thing they know in the midst of a life of just pure survival. It's been very enlightening for me.
Well, Shawn, I really applaud you for going down this direction because I have to admit, and I'll confess, I drive by every one of them and I think in my mind, like you just said, oh, they're just scamming us. They're trying to get money for booze or drugs or whatever. But you're right. I'm dehumanizing them. I'm already prejudging why they're there, and the circumstances of why they're there is really to their own making. But that's not true. I know that, but in my head, that's what I'm telling myself. So when you talk about dignity, Shawn, I want to know how you apply that word to those experiencing homelessness.
Yeah, great question. And Larry, you're dealing with the same feelings and thoughts that I think most people would have. Even those who, like myself, have worked for years with those who are poor, those who are marginalized, those who are experiencing homelessness, those living on the streets. I've worked with those who have mental illness, those who have been chemically dependent, those who have been disabled. All of those folks can be people that are reduced to experiencing homelessness because they can't get a job. They can't hold a job. It can be, of course, also the result of their own actions. It may not be that they're a victim. They may have victimized themselves by making poor choices. The thing I always remember, though, is this. When we define mercy, we always say mercy is not deserved. And the irony of this is we think when somebody did it to themselves that we always say to ourselves they don't deserve mercy. So that's the irony. But which one of us does? Which one of us, if we were left to our own choices and didn't have some help from God above or from the community around us, wouldn't be in a very dire situation? Maybe we wouldn't experience homelessness, but maybe we would have been in a very big heap of trouble and we've overcome it. Again, though, I'm not here to exonerate. I'm just here to give perspective. I'm not here to vilify, though, either. I want to try to do the best I can to hear through neutral ears and to see through neutral eyes, and to be able to offer, as you said, dignity. And that's a form of respect, treating somebody as a peer rather than a lesser than, not offering pity as if it's a downhill gift. Sometimes we offer pity giving rather than actually investing into someone. And I can't invest into someone if I can't really understand what they're going through and what their goals and dreams were as a child, what their current circumstance is and what got them there and where they're hoping to go in the future. These are some of the questions we're asking.
Well, I'm going to ask you in just a minute or two here to share a story where dignity wasn't shown to some of the people you have interviewed, because some of the things that were said to some of those on the street. But I can't help but think, Shawn, that God loves these people. There isn't a lack of love on God's part because they're homeless or they've hit a patch of bad luck or they're diseased or they're mentally ill or they're unemployable. God still loves them. They're important to Him because they belong to Him. And if they belong to Him and they are important to Him, shouldn't they be important to me? Yet many times, Shawn, you've told me the stories of when these persons on the street holding a sign, they're shouted at by drivers that are driving by. Tell us some of those stories. Tell us some of the things that were said to them.
Yeah, well, the thing that happens very often is I was told by a couple different people, I feel embarrassed to be on the street holding a sign, but I got robbed. And I was struggling to find a place to stay already. Went to a shelter and got mugged in the bathroom by 3 or 4 guys. And they stole my ID and they stole my birth certificate. And they said I've lost my cell phone as well. One person said I've had 15 cell phones stolen. They get the burner phones that they can buy. Said it's just any electronics, anything you have, it's basically you got to hold it and carry it with you. He says one person told me I had 15 blankets. She was with a boyfriend. And she said they stole 14 of those blankets, including the one that was on my boyfriend. This is just what happens. It's the streets. You know, I know one person who used to live in a porta potty at night because he could lock the door and be safe. We just don't realize even shelters aren't always safe. And then if you're out in the street, at least you can control where you're going. And they often try to team up. The things that I hear, though, the people that drive by, the key one is always, why don't you get a job? They don't understand it's not so simple. You have no ID. You have no address. You have no birth certificate. You don't even have a phone that you can reliably give the number to because that number may change. It's a burner phone. You're really in a dire position to try to get a job. The other thing I think people don't realize, if you've been addicted to any kind of substance, your emotional maturity stops right at that point where you started. So you've got that going against you. You probably haven't had any good mentors. And the one thing that comes up over and over again is they're not acclimated to working 5 days a week, 8 hours a day yet. They can't just jump from 0 to 60 in a second. They have to have a ramp up. There's got to be an acclimation. And if we're going to do this well, we can't just point the way. We got to lead the way. We got to take and walk alongside people and give them an opportunity where they're going to make some mistakes and they're going to do some selfish things. We think if they really mean it, well, then they'll never be selfish. They'll only appreciate, they'll be forever grateful that you're feeding them food and giving them a bed to stay. My point is, it's not just about discipline any more than it is for somebody who's trying to lose weight and they just can't eat less, or they can't stop eating the stuff that they shouldn't be eating, or they may have some biological things that prevent them from losing weight. It's not always as easy as just telling somebody to do the right thing. You need God's help. You need a miracle, and you need a support system around you. It's the same thing here. We all need this. And I think we somehow make it into they're not serious or they're not really trying their best if they don't suddenly become a person that is just forever humbly grateful, and they suddenly show extreme responsibility when they've not had that pattern or that model previously.
Shawn, I have a friend who went through 15 recovery programs before he actually got clean. And so at some point, maybe around 8 or 9, I gave up on him. Yeah. I mean, I said, you're hopeless. And wrong attitude on my part. I get it. But after 8 or 10 tries, you'd think that they would get something right and begin moving toward health. So a lot of the stuff that happens to these people, and we're trying to help them, let's say we are trying to help them, it is a test of patience and a test of love, I think, from God, because he wants us to care for one another, and not just the easy people. It's easy to care for your blood, right? Your own family, your own kids and relatives, but to care for somebody you don't know who's holding a sign at the exit of a freeway or something, I just don't feel I have any responsibility whatsoever for that person. But you would say, in kindness in our hearts toward God and toward other ones, what would you say to someone like me?
Well, first and foremost, just your initial point, you're not different all that much than others, other than your perseverance in serving somebody 8 times might be longer than most. I mean, even the disciples said, should we forgive 7? And Jesus said, no, 70 times 7. So they were trying to go, 7 seems like a large number that we would forgive our brother if he comes back to us. And in a sense, that's what you're saying is, I'm standing with my brother 8 times, going through the same thing. And yet Jesus kind of almost gives that answer that sounds like we're supposed to perpetually forgive and perpetually invest ourselves, because it's never about us. We always make it about us. And redemption is offered, like it says in Titus 2, it says, the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation to all men. Now, and it really means all people. But why is it that not all people receive the grace of God? Because they don't put themselves in the position that they're able to. So your friend took 15 times before he was positioned and in that place that he could actually receive the grace that was already being extended to him. And it's the same way when we raise our children. We're never going to give up on our children, but they may tempt us at times. We might go, you puddinhead, why are you doing that? I told you not to do that. And yet, because we care about them so deeply, we don't give up on them any more than God gives up on us. And we always have to remember that he did not give up on us. What he forgave us was probably far worse than anybody who has been experiencing homelessness has been forgiven, because most people who are experiencing homelessness had a far worse upbringing than you and I. You and I may have had some tough challenges, but we had certain level of stability that probably kept us from going too far into that. Or there's a rare exception. Some people just can overcome things better. But most of the people I've interviewed, they have come from just really difficult situations. They didn't have moms and dads that were in their life that were able to help them. The moms and dads were in a survival mode. One gal, she was incredibly smart, and you could tell just talking to her. And she's sitting on a street corner in a wheelchair, and her 13-year-old daughter's next to her. And they're out there just asking for help. And I just talked to her about it. I just want to learn and listen. She tells me, she goes, I graduated high school early. She goes, I was really smart. I was top of my class. She goes, I graduated a little bit before 17 years old. And I'm like, wow, I couldn't have done that. She goes, I made some poor life choices. And she says, I got pregnant and I wasn't going to let this baby not enter this world. But she goes, I wasn't prepared to be a mom. She goes, I ended up getting married. She goes, and then my husband, something was not right in his head, and he tried to kill me in a car accident. She goes, I lost my leg. She goes, I lost my thumb and my finger on my hand. She goes, now here I am. She goes, I got 3 kids. I'm trying to make sure they have a place to stay at night. She goes, I sleep under bridges in my wheelchair. She goes, I can't find a place for me, and I can't find a place that will support my whole family. She goes, and even if I could, it's temporary, and I can never move ahead. She goes, I'm always climbing a very steep climb. She goes, and it's so steep that if I move back 1 inch, she goes, I lose traction and go back, and the system just doesn't accommodate people like me who have unique circumstances. She goes, put yourself in any circumstance, put yourself in a foreign country, and you have something bad happen to you. What are you going to do? And she goes, I've learned how to survive. My circumstances haven't been able to help me get ahead with the system. Even though the system gives some support, it won't give enough support to actually move me ahead where I can get stability again in my life. I had one guy, Larry, he was an HVAC guy. He had a business and a career, and then he couldn't manage his diabetes anymore. He ended up in a apartment that was a slumlord, and he got put in an apartment. He was in a wheelchair. He's very sickly, and he couldn't hardly see. And he said they didn't even clean the apartment from the previous tenant. He said they just threw me in there. He said, so now here I am. He says, I live on a very limited income. He said, and all my money goes to dialysis and everything else. He goes, I just can't afford it. He says, I'm all these different things. I need medicines. He goes, and so I just have to try to get something just for some extra change. He says, because I can't buy groceries. He says, I have to eat the right kind of groceries. He said, that's expensive. So there's all these circumstances that are easy from a surface level to judge, but I've just decided to hold my own opinions and listen. Now, are some of them that we meet scamming and some have mental illness? Absolutely. We have that other side too, where they're just using it for their own ends, and it's the easier way than to hold a job. It's lacking a responsibility. But there are things that are extenuating circumstances that we should first understand and then see if we can help somebody to move forward if they want it. It has to be something that's a mutuality, though.
I would say, Shawn, that many times I have said these words. Well, there's social programs out there. Holy cow, Minnesota is filled with social programs. Why don't you sign up and get involved somehow? But you've said already that that's not always the case, right?
There are programs, and they will help you to a certain extent. What you run into, though, is often these programs and the places they stay are not next to each other. One guy says, he goes, I walk 20 miles a day. He said, so I get to a program, and he said, my socks are constantly worn out. My shoes are worn out. He says, I misfit. He says, I got terrible foot issues. He said, I can't take a bath. He said, I'm kicked out of the shelter by, he said, between 5:30 and 6:30 in the morning. He says, so I'm literally on the street all day. He said, before I would normally wake up, he said, I'd probably normally wake up about 7. He says, but I've got to get out on their schedule. He says, my life is just disarray. He says, and then I'm constantly in line waiting for something. He says, frankly, it's not worth the walk sometimes. And he says, I can't afford the bus fare. And, there's all these different things. And everybody says there's a program, but you have to have somebody help you apply for those. You might have to have a computer. You might have to, sit in line at an office forever. What are you going to do for lunch? Nobody wants to be around you because you smell bad. I mean, it's just one thing after another. And if they have a dog for protection or just for companionship, that changes the equation too. Then if they have their stuff, they got to carry that with them. They cannot leave it out. They don't have lockers typically. I mean, there's exceptions to everything I'm saying. There's certainly cases where somebody says, I know somebody, but this is what I'm finding is a majority of the people, they're dealing with something that is really difficult. I ran into somebody, his name was Chris, this last Sunday. Chris was deaf. Imagine. Now, I could sign to him. So he was just thrilled, but most people can't talk to him. So he has silence everywhere he goes. They're always writing notes. Chris is a forklift driver, and he was able to, and also stocking shelves. He's done that. He can't get housing because he can't communicate effectively. Everything's in writing, so it takes 3 times as long. And so those are the kind of things you deal with.
Well, Shawn, I really appreciate you, painting a different picture for us. You're giving us a compassionate, kind sort of image of what's happening out on the street. And as you say, there's exceptions to everything. Okay, so I get the image now. What do I do with it? I mean, do I give money? Do I volunteer I just don't know what to do for that person standing on the corner with a sign. What do you suggest?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I like to use the illustration we've all heard, the kid that's throwing starfish that are stuck on the beach back in the ocean, and the grandfather or the dad or whoever it was says, you can't save them all. He says, no, but I can save this one. And really, that's what we have to do. Is this is an enormous circumstance, and we can develop better systems that can help those experiencing homelessness. But let's pare it down to what the individual can do, because I think that's more meaningful. If I were to tell you, Larry, as an individual, certainly I'd say help with advocacy and give to those groups that are doing something that's maybe with a long-term view and a long-term approach. But if you're just driving by somebody, the one thing they said is this: roll down your window and talk to me like a person. Now, every once in a while, that person might say something to you too, and they might be snarky because they've been beat up and abused verbally all day long. And they're out there sometimes between 1 and 5 to 6 hours. So just have compassion on them as a person without the expectation that you have to give. If you want to give, sure. They said, as I asked them this, they said, well, what do you make on a good day? And I've had some say as much as $150, and some, they said, I can be out here 2-3 hours and make only $10. Ever since COVID, money's not as popular. So they said, what other things you can give is gift cards, or you can give food. Socks came up many times. People need socks. And now we have a foot care program, and we see how desperately some of these men and women need socks. But on the streets, or if you're living in a tent community, socks are a big deal. But any type of food, particularly as healthy as possible, but sometimes a little treat is helpful too. The treat, because you've got a lot of bad issues with health and diabetes and tooth issues, probably not too many candy type of things. Bottle of water, though. Imagine if you need water, you got to go all the way to the library or some public place where you can get a glass of water. So think about all these people are sitting out there on a hot day. Water would be a real gift.
Yeah.
The other thing is this. They said consistently, when someone pulls up to the street corner and they're not going to give me anything, they always act as if they're looking for something in their car. They won't make eye contact. They said, I just want to be seen. I just want to be humanized. I just want to feel like I'm a somebody and I'm not less than them and I'm not being judged.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we call it Can You See Me?
I love it, Shawn, and I really, really do. I know the church I attended in South Minneapolis for a while, they would do homeless packs. I mean, the church would get, in fact, Good in the Hood supplied a lot of the materials, the food, the socks, all of that water into these packs, and then the congregation would take them when they leave church, and they would have them in their car for that moment where they're going to encounter a person experiencing homelessness. So, Shawn, I want to come back to the idea, can you see me? I know you and I have talked about this in the past. I remember years ago you were talking about something like this. Tell us more about exactly what you're hoping to do by interviewing these people. You're actually taking some pictures, I believe. What are you going to do with all of it?
I approached probably 3-4 professional photographers over the last couple of years, and every one of them felt like I needed to have some strategic plan before we could actually go out and encounter someone that's experiencing homelessness. And I said, you need to understand something. These folks don't live by a calendar. So I said, we need to just, here's our strategic plan. We're going to listen and ask questions, and we're going to greet them and meet them as people, person to person. Somehow, when somebody becomes a person that's unhoused, we all think we need to be self-appointed protectors of them. We don't treat them like adults anymore. My goal is that we'd humanize these precious ones. And so I finally was able to connect with another person who is a professional photographer, Mr. Shawn Nielsen, has my same first name, so that's great. But Shawn and I are both 6'3" and taller. So we said it probably would look bad for two tall guys to walk up to somebody. It would be a little bit intimidating. So we brought along a friend, Beth Korth, who's helping with it. And Beth helps with just kind of make it a little less threatening when we walk up to somebody. I usually lead the conversation and do the interview. I would say this, Larry, every person I've encountered, and we've interviewed 26 people, I believe, so far. Everyone that I've encountered has been kind to me. I feel like I'm their guest, and I'm trying to reach out in kindness to these precious ones, and they're actually treating me like I'm somebody special. Mm-hmm. It's just been really wonderful. We've probably had one person outright say they didn't want to be interviewed. Another person just didn't want their name and face used because of some things in their past that they felt like was going to put them on the front and center of maybe where they could be in danger. What we're looking to do is provide it as a hard copy book that can be like a tabletop book with these pictures of these lovely people. Sometimes, Larry, I've given them a hug when I'm done, and they're just crying, they're just weeping, and they're just collapsing in my arms. And as we talked to them about what their story was, and I mean, some of them said, no one's ever asked me that before. No one ever cared. One guy, he was rejected by his mother at 6 years old, put in foster homes, I think he said 30 some foster homes. And at 18, he was kicked out on the streets. And he's been there since then. It's been about 20 years. So we're hoping to have a hardcover book that we will offer at no charge. If somebody wants to give a donation to help cover the cost, that'd be certainly welcome. But it's just to help us to see people that maybe have been intentionally not seen. And that's the heart of it. We feel like we're walking, honestly, Larry, on holy ground here. Mm-hmm. Every time we're out there, and Shawn and Beth and I have all said, we feel like we're nearer to God than we were before we went out there.
Shawn, I would say that people that are listening today, they're saying, well, okay, I want to get a piece of that. I want to be a part of that. So if they really want to help Good in the Hood and Shawn, yourself, and the other Shawn, go out on the streets, what can they do? Give us some practical ideas of how they can help you. First one, I guess, would be money, right? But give us some ideas.
Yeah, I don't know that money would be the first place I'd go. I think, particularly if it's a regular corner that you see someone there, you might actually build a relationship with someone. Offer a bottle of water. Maybe once a week you offer a bottle of water. It's often people kind of who are using street signs or asking for help. They often use the same location. They might move around a little bit, but they know where the busy corners are, where traffic stops. And so they just want to be noticed. Bring a bottle of water, bring a snack, bring a pair of socks, gift card. I would recommend a gift card over cash, just because there are many who are still addicted and it's not something they can control. They're not in a good place and it's probably going to be used in the wrong way. But a gift card, particularly one to a specific store. We give away Walmart and Target cards or Cub cards or something, Aldi, something where they can get something that would be useful. That's another way to help. Blankets are always welcome. Sometimes those are too big to hand out from a car. And I'm trying to think as you're passing somebody and you have a moment to be with them, something that's relevant in their life is going to be simple food, simple care packs, things like toothbrush, toothpaste, those kind of things. Water, snacks, gift card, socks.
Shawn, where do they go online to find out more about this program or find out more about Good in the Hood? Where do they go?
Yeah, this is a project, so it's not going to be on our website, and we're kind of doing it. This is actually our first public even announcement of it. Just I wanted people to understand the plight of those that we see every day. But if they want to learn more about Good in the Hood and the work we do, because we do help those experiencing homelessness, they can go to our website, goodinthehood.org. That's goodinthehood.org.
Shawn, give us a compassionate wisdom word as we conclude today. I want to hear some of that wisdom that you have stored up in your heart. It's driven by kindness and compassion.
Nobody is an anybody. Everybody is a unique somebody. And it's our job to, as ambassadors of Christ, to reach into the crowd of the many, to reach that one who is hungry and thirsty, to know him and hungry and thirsty to move forward in life. Hopefully to experience the goodness of God practically and also eternally.
This isn't the end. It's only the beginning of your journey to trust God for the truth you never want to lose. We can help. Log on to citysightsurbanmedia.com today. Remember, there's only one truth and only one God, and you should know them both.